All right, so this week we're going to talk about attraction and close relationships. So when you ask people what's the most important thing in life, a lot of times what they're going to tell you is that it's something about their relationships with other people. It's their family, it's their significant other, this kind of thing. Historically, famous psychologists have noted this as well. Freud says that sex and love is motivating a lot of human behavior. William James says, that we're born into this life, and the best thing that we can have are friendships and intimacy with other people. So clearly, people recognize that attraction and close relationships are important. And in this class, we're going to discuss things like attraction. We're going to discuss things like long-term relationships in this video. But there's a couple warnings. So when we talk about attraction, we're talking about both sexual and friendship. So one can be attracted to someone without having a sexual relationship with that person or wanting to have a sexual relationship with that person. Another key distinction here is that when we're talking about the relationships, most of the time we are talking about heterosexual relationships. Most of the research that supports what we're going to be talking about today relates directly to heterosexual relationships. But that's not to say that these things don't necessarily apply to gays and lesbians as well. There's just less of that research out there, verifying that many of these things fit those kinds of relationships. We've talked about this idea already that people are sort of inherently social animals. You think about the social ostracism. One of the reasons why social ostracism is such a negative experience for us is because people have this sort of universal need for affiliation. We want to have and maintain relationships with other people. And we want to avoid feeling lonely. Now, to be clear, loneliness defined is just a desire for more human contact than you already have, right? So if you are the kind of person who doesn't really like people and you prefer to just sit in your office and work all day, just the absence of human contact doesn't define loneliness. So that person isn't lonely unless they want more human contact than they're actually getting. So that's really what defines loneliness, not the amount of human contact per se, but the amount of human contact relative to the amount that is desired. So real quick, we're going to do an in-class exercise. Go ahead and open this up on Moodle and fill it out real quick. Just take a couple minutes, pause my video. When you come back, we'll kind of talk about what most people say about in this question, in this activity. All right, so I'm going to assume that you've gone and filled that out. We'll continue on. We've talked about evolutionary theory a little bit. Evolutionary psychologists have a lot to say about attraction, and they make some key assumptions. Primarily that differences that we see between men and women are based on our genetic past, that these differences are somehow related to different strategies that men and women use or that were effective in our evolutionary past in passing on genes to the next generation. Although there is some controversy about this, and we'll kind of briefly mention some of this. So there's one theory, the parental investment sexual selection theory, and they make these claims that reproductive success is different for men and women. That for men, right, again, men can have as many babies as they can find willing or unwilling partners, if you really think about it. And so reproductive success for men is defined by having as many babies as possible, right? So if you think about, the evolutionary context, in our past, the males who are the most successful have the most children. They mate with the most women. If you're a male, then what you want to do is guarantee that your offspring will live on to pass on your genes. So you're going to be looking for young mates who are more likely to survive childbirth, And also chaste mates, so mates who have not had too many sexual partners, because that way you can guarantee that this child is actually your child. So you're going to be looking for attractive young women who are chaste and are sexually faithful to you, the man. Now, women, on the other hand, again, this is according to evolutionary theorists, women, on the other hand, reproductive success for women is ensured by being selective, right? We've mentioned this idea before that women can only have a fixed number of children in their lifetime, whereas men's ability to have children is relatively, theoretically limitless. Women's ability to have children is finite. They only have a certain number of eggs. They can only carry so many children to term over their reproductive life. And so women have to be selective. Women have to choose men who have money and status that can provide for their children. And so this is the evolutionary perspective. And there is some evidence for this. So if you think back to the activity, it had you rank the top 115, it had you rank the top, your top priorities and mates on a scale of 1 to 15. And when we look at this, we see that typically women rate good financial prospects and ambition and industriousness higher on their list compared to men. Now, that's not necessarily to say that it's the top of their list, but relative to men, these qualities are higher up in their rankings. Whereas men, relative to women, put good looks and chastity significantly higher than men. Now, when we do this in class, typically we get this same kind of pattern, but what you find is that most people put things like intelligence and a sense of humor higher up than all of these things on their list. Right? Kind and understanding, intelligent above all. So, the evolutionary explanation here is that, attractiveness and youth are signs of fertility. Chastity is a sign that there's no other kids that you have to raise. For women, financial prospects means access to resources and better chance of your children as women surviving into adulthood. But one of the problems with this perspective is that this sort of amounts to, reverse engineering, right? These are the things that are useful to us today, that people rate higher today, so therefore they must have been useful, they must have an evolutionary basis. And this is kind of like a Flintstoneization of our past, right? It ignores the fact that the evolutionary pressures that we experience today, in terms of access to resources, in terms of inheritance, right? In terms of parental investment in each individual child, these things are different than they used to be in our evolutionary past. For example, people used to have way more kids than we have these days. In the United States, you hear about the 2.6 children that people have. The average number of kids. Well, in the past, it used to be people had tremendously more kids, 5, 10 kids over the course of their lifetime. And so, this modern perspective makes some pretty big assumptions, right? It assumes that people used to live in, monogamous, didactic, two-person relationships. And really, there isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that this was the case until very recently in our evolutionary past. Right? It also assumes that people made the connection between sex and the occurrence of pregnancy and babies. But from an evolutionary perspective, this is a relatively advanced understanding. People really didn't develop the knowledge that sex led to women getting pregnant and having babies until people started developing agriculture and animal husbandry, right? When they started realizing that, if we mate these animals together, then the animals have babies. And so this kind of throws out some of the arguments, or at least contradicts some of the arguments made by evolutionary theory. Now, this is a huge source of controversy, so I'm not suggesting that one perspective is more right than the other, but just be aware that, there is some some of the claims made by evolutionary psychologists, are, sort of difficult to tease apart empirically with the research. So we'll talk about attractiveness. So, this quote here, "A beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Sometimes it's necessary to give the beholder a black eye. Right? So if I ask students, what is attractive, students can oftentimes give us examples of attractiveness, but they don't really know how to define attractiveness. So we'll talk about some areas of research that have defined key features of what makes something or someone attractive. The first thing is symmetrical. Attractiveness, attractive people, attractive things, we like symmetry. Right? This means that you can sort of bisect the item, like Brad Pitt's face here, and it's exactly the same on either side, right? So we really, really like symmetrical faces. We really, really like things to be symmetrical, especially faces. And part of this may be, sort of an indication of biological health. There's overwhelming evidence that people prefer symmetrical faces to asymmetrical faces, like this one. Right? Shannon Doherty, very asymmetrical face. She's got that one wonky eye that's just like higher than the other one. People prefer symmetrical faces, but we're not really entirely sure why that is. This area is sort of open to continuing research. Other things about attractiveness is that we like average faces or averaged faces. So an interesting study, they took pictures of undergraduates, and they all had them, basically in the same background. And then what they did is they digitally averaged these photos together, right? So the same way that you can take two numbers and you can average them together, right? So if you take 6 and 3 and you average them together, you end up with 4.5, right? The same way you can take two faces and you can blend them together to average out their features. And what they did was they averaged out these photos into composites, and each composite contained different numbers of faces. So a composite had 2 faces averaged together, 4 faces, up to 32 different faces. And then they showed these to female undergraduates, and they had them rate how attractive they were, right? And this is an example of a composite face, right? So you can see the face in the middle is the averaged face, and it's a composite of all of these faces around the outside. And what they find is that the more faces that go into a composite, the more attractive people found this person's face to be, right? Which is kind of interesting. Again, it gets at this idea of potentially like biological or physical health, right? You don't have a lot of abnormalities or unusualness in your face, right? So another thing about attractiveness is that there's a stereotype about attractiveness. We talked about this idea that as humans, we're constantly sort of categorizing. And oftentimes we categorize unconsciously. And 2 of our big categories that we have are good and bad. And what we find is that people put attractive things automatically into the good category. So we have this sort of what is attractive is equal to what is good. And this may be based on this assumption that, physically attractive people are also, attractive in other ways besides their physical appearance. I mean, this may be, socially desirable. But this kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy when you think about it, right? If we value attractiveness and attractive people are valued and favored, then they're going to come to believe that they must have these socially desirable traits. Okay. Another interesting study is the bogus stranger study, right? So this asks the question, okay, who are we attracted to? So not what defines attractiveness now, but who are we attracted to? One interesting answer to this question of who we are attracted to is that we are attracted to people who are similar to us. So in this study, they bring people into the lab, and they randomly assign them to one of 3 conditions. They're either in the low similarity, moderate similarity, or high similarity condition. And what they're told is, hey, we want you to evaluate these 15 different attitude measures. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about, the summer? How do you feel about the beach? How do you feel about these things? And then we're going to ask you to evaluate this stranger who rated these same items. So a participant gives their ratings. They hand their ratings to the researcher. The researcher comes back into the room and hands them the stranger's ratings. And what they did was they manipulated how similar the stranger was to the participant. So in the low similarity condition, the stranger evaluates almost the opposite. So if you like the beach, the stranger hates the beach. If you like, if you like going to the movies, the stranger hates going to the movies, right? But in the high similarity condition, it's the opposite, right? Whatever you like, the stranger likes. And then what they did is they had them evaluate how much they like this stranger, right? And turns out, as you can see from this graph, people like the stranger the most when they were the most similar to them on these attitude measures, right? So the conclusion here is that we like people who like the same things that we do, right? Or we like people who are similar to us. There's also a matching hypothesis. Again, who are we attracted to? We seek romantic partners who are similar to us, right? We like people who are similar to us, and this extends to romantic relationships, right? And oftentimes what you will see, if you really think about it, is that people will match up in terms of physical attractiveness, right? It is common for people to be the similar level of physical attractiveness, right? Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are both really attractive men and women, and they are together. People who are moderately attractive tend to be attracted to other people who are moderately attractive. But sometimes there are these weird mismatches, right? So again, if you think about this couple over here on the left that just popped in, right? There's a mismatch between the attractiveness level of this woman over here and this man, right? So what about this question? Well, maybe opposites attract. Maybe it's not that we are attracted to people who are like us. We're attracted to those who are the opposite of us. This is called the complementary hypothesis, and generally speaking, this is not true. The evidence suggests that we like people who are similar to us in romantic relationships, not people who are different, right? And when you think about this, right, it's no fun, spending lots of time with someone who doesn't share any of your interests, right? What are you going to talk about with this person if you guys don't share a lot of or have some kind of common interests? Right? Also think about the confirmation bias, right? We like to have our attitudes confirmed and validated, right? So we're going to look for people who think the same way we do. We're also attracted to people who have similar beliefs to us. So Heider, and we kind of already talked about Heider a little bit, he had this theory called balance theory. And the idea behind balance theory is that we want to keep a balance between the things that we like and the things that our friends like, right? We want to have most of these things be in balance. Now, let me explain how this balance theory works, right? So imagine that there's a triangle between you, another person, and some attitude object. Now, this attitude object can be anything, right? It could be dogs. It could be going to the beach. It could be gum, right? Whatever it is. If you imagine that each point in the triangle has a link that is your attitude, and those attitudes can be either positive or negative, right? Then we can construct a lot of different scenarios, right? So, you might have a positive attitude towards person A. You might have a positive attitude towards the object, right? You like your friend Sam, and you also like chewing gum, right? Does that make sense? So here's an example. So here's me and my wife. So I have a positive attitude towards Liz, who's my wife. And I also have a positive attitude towards ginger molasses cookies. And so for balance, Liz also needs to have a positive attitude towards ginger molasses cookies. And so here's me. I have a positive attitude towards Liz. Here's my wife. And we all both have a positive attitude towards these, delicious ginger molasses cookies. Now, as long as the triangle is balanced, right, then that minimizes tension in the relationship, right? The multiplicative properties of the positives and the negatives must be the same, right? They must be the same, right? Now, what happens is, so what this means is that If you've got two positives and a negatives, the triangle is balanced. If you have two negatives and a positive, the triangle is also balanced. But if you have any of those other combinations, the triangle becomes imbalanced. So here, for example, I like Liz, right? But I don't like music festivals, and Liz does like music festivals. Liz loves going to Lollapalooza. She loves going to Pitchfork. She loves going to all these different music festivals in Chicago in the summer. But I don't really like that. I mean, I like music, I just don't like big crowds of people, right? In this situation, right, there is tension, right? Liz wants to go to the music festival. I don't. I have a different attitude, right? This creates tension in the relationship. Now, there's things that we can do to reduce this balanced triangle, right? To reduce this tension, right? To resolve it, I can change my attitude towards Liz, right? So if I don't like Liz and I don't like music festivals and Liz likes music festivals, right, the triangle is balanced. Or I can try and get Liz to change her attitudes. Again, this would balance the equation, right? I like you, we both don't like music festivals, okay? Or I can change my attitude. I can be like, well, I'll just come around and I'll go. Like, I don't hate them that much, right? Now, the important thing for this balance theory is that we don't have to change these things, right? But if you take this simple idea of balanced attitudes between you and your relationship partner on attitudes, and you zoom out to all the different attitudes that you might have, the more unbalanced triangles you have in your relationship, the more tension that there is in that relationship, unless you can resolve some of those problems. Another indicator of attraction is proximity. This is how physically close you get to other people. Simply put, you often are going to, be friendly with or date people that you see, people that you work with, people that work near you, right? So, for example, married couples in this study are randomly assigned to housing units, right? So you can imagine. You can imagine kind of your standard Chicago apartment building. If you could randomly assign people to live in different apartments, what you're going to find is that the people who are close to each other tend to develop friendships compared to the people who live further away from each other. Right? They do this study in college dorms, right? Students who live near the common area, right? So if you imagine there's sort of a common area in the middle and there's a long hallway that leads off the common area, the student that lives in that dorm room right next to the common area, people tend to like that student more. They tend to be more popular and have more friends compared to the students who live all the way at the end of the hallway, right? Because they're physically close. You pass by their room all the time. So part of the proximity is convenience. Like, it's easier to have relationships with people who are closer to you. It's easier to be friendly with people that you see at work every day than random people that you knew in high school and now live 30 miles away. Also exposure, right? We like things that we're exposed to more frequently, right? We like those that we live near, hopefully. We like people that we see at work, hopefully, right? So, for example, in another mere exposure study, researchers subliminally exposed people to different shapes, right? So this is sort of an image flashing on a computer screen, but it's happening faster below your conscious awareness. And later they were asked participants to rate whether they'd seen it and the extent to which they liked it, right? Participants didn't rate having actually seen these shapes before, but they liked the ones that they were exposed to compared to the ones they weren't. So again, this is more of this idea of mere exposure. We like the things that we're exposed to more often than the things that we aren't. Unless we already have a negative attitude about it, then the more often we're exposed to it, then the more we hate it, right? We talked about that. So go ahead and just take a break real quick in your notes. Write down your 5 favorite letters. It's just sort of not an activity per se, a little sort of in-class exercise as you will. We're going to compute a ratio here in a little bit. Just write down your 5 favorite letters. All right, now go ahead and count up the number of non-repeating letters in your first and last name and write that down in the denominator of a fraction. So again, this is the bottom. Now count up the number of times your favorite letters appear in your name, right? So how many times do your favorite letters appear in your name? Put that in the numerator, right? Each letter in the alphabet has a 5 in 26 chance, or a 1/5 chance of being on your list. And I say here, because this is from my face-to-face class, so now raise your hand if the letters chosen make up more than 1/5 of the letters of your name. Typically what happens when we do this exercise is that the letters, your 5 favorite letters, tend to be 5 for 5 out of the letters of your name, right? They tend to be the letters in your name. And why is this, right? This has to do with the mere exposure, right? We're exposed to our names all the time. So if I say pick 5 letters at random from the alphabet, tell me how, your 5 favorite letters, you're going to pick the letters that are in your name. This is another study of mere exposure, right? So Bob Zonek, again, we talked about this author once before, put Chinese characters and symbols into a school newspaper. And, the students, came into the lab and, they don't really report having seen these Chinese letters. None of them spoke Chinese. And yet, they liked the Chinese characters more than other Chinese characters that hadn't been put into the school newspaper and that they hadn't already been previously exposed to, even some outside of their conscious awareness. All right. Here's another fun study about mere exposure. People judge 2 sets of photos of themselves, right? So they bring the photo into the lab and we ask, how much do you like this photo? One of the sets was a regular photo, and the other was a mirror image, right? So you imagine you take a photograph and you flip the image so it's mirrored. And they asked people how much they like these photos, and what they found was that people like the mirror image photos more compared to the regular photos. Now, why might this be? Well, how often are you exposed to a mirror image of your face, right? Probably every day. Most people look in the mirror once a day. How often are you exposed to your face from other people's perspectives, right? Not very often, right? Only in pictures, right? So people like the mirror image photos more. Now, what's crazy about this study is that if you ask these people's friends, you can imagine which photos they like more, right? They like the direct photos more because this is the exposure, this is the perspective that they're used to seeing. So again, it comes down to this mere exposure. All right, so we'll talk briefly about love. You might ask the question, how do you define love? There's a theory, Sternberg's triangle theory of love, triarchic theory of love, and we'll talk about different kinds of love. So companionate love is, attraction and affection we feel for people who we are deeply committed to. So you can think about companionate love in terms of sort of family relationships. Deep affection, intimacy, trust. Passionate love is this sort of state of intense longing or union with another person. You can think of this as sort of hot love, a sexual love on some level. Romantic love includes sexual desire, physical attraction, and also idealization. So seeing the person as, unrealistically, in an unrealistically positive way, idealization. One thing that is interesting is that this unrealistic positive view of relationship partners, idealization, is actually associated with relationship satisfaction. The more that you, and again, we talk about association, the more that you idealize your partner, the more satisfied you are in the relationship, even if that idealization is unrealistic or inaccurate. And there is a distinction between, loving someone and being in love with someone. You can love someone without sort of being in love with them, right? So, love for a parent is obviously different than love for your romantic partner. And we can talk about this Sternberg triangle theory of love, where we can plot together all of these different aspects of love. And the kind of love that we're talking about depends on these three key components to love. And these components are commitment, intimacy, and passion. So you can think about commitment as sort of, if we map this onto the ABCs of psychology, commitment is sort of the cognitive component to love. Intimacy is more the affective component to love. And passion, you can think about this as sort of the behavioral or the motivational component of love. Now, when we put this all together into Sternberg's theory, right, if you have just intimacy, right, this is sort of akin to you just like someone. If you have just passion, right, just, sort of behavioral sexual motivation, right, this is infatuation for someone. And if you have just commitment to someone, that's it, just commitment. This is sort of what we call empty love. You can kind of think about people who maybe were married at one time and had intimacy and passion and commitment, but over time they've grown apart. They're still married, they still love each other, but they don't really like each other, and they're not really passionate towards each other. This is more of this sort of empty love. Now, if you have intimacy and passion, right, you really like someone and you're really passionate towards them, this is what we call kind of romantic love. If you have intimacy, if you really like someone, and you're committed to them, this is companionate love, right? So you can think about this in terms of that sort of old married couple. They like each other, they're committed to the relationship, but they don't really have any of that sort of passion that maybe the relationship once had. That's more companionate love. And then down here at the bottom, we have this sort of fatuous love, right? So this is intense passion with commitment, but without any intimacy. And you can think about, the example of this is sort of, the people who meet in Las Vegas, and they're, very, very passionate with each other, and they go ahead and they get married in a weekend, right? They don't know each other very well. They don't really have intimacy, but they've got commitment and passion. This is sort of fatuous love. Now, in the middle, this sort of consummate love, this sort of ideal love, is a combination of these three things, right? You have passion for your partner, and you're committed to the relationship, but you also like your partner. You like spending time with them. You have an intimacy with them. Absence of love is not represented here, but we call this non-love. When you have none of these things, then this is non-love. All right. Again, also notice here too, or note here, that none of these things are sort of all or nothing, right? This isn't you either have passion or you don't, right? These are continuous variables. They can range. So you can have intense passion or sort of mild passion. You can have intense commitment or mild commitment, right? There's sort of a range of these sorts of things. So commitment, when we talk about long-term relationships, there are three key components that define your level of commitment to a relationship. Pardon me, sorry. These things are satisfaction, alternatives, and investments. And these can determine whether you stay or leave a relationship. And this is true for even, bad or unhealthy relationships. So, if you're satisfied with a relationship and you don't really have any alternatives and you've invested a lot of time in the relationship, you might continue to stay in the relationship even if maybe there's some things about it that you don't like. So, when we think about commitment, you can think about this idea of social exchange, that all relationships have rewards and costs. There's sorry, I'm just thinking of this example. There's a radio personality who does a love column, love advice column. His name is Dan Savage, and one thing that he says quite a bit is that settling down is settling for. That there is no perfect person out there who's going to meet all of your criteria for the ideal, long-term relationship partner. And all relationships have this sort of balance of rewards, good things, and costs, bad things, right? Rewards are things that you get out of the relationship that increase satisfaction, and costs are things that you put up with, things that your partner does that annoy you. And ideally, in this social exchange theory, these costs and rewards are balanced, right? But the other thing too is that people approach these relationships with comparison levels, right? People have this sort of pre-existing set of expectations about what they want to get out of the relationship, right? And the costs are weighed against those rewards, right? The costs are weighed against the rewards, but that depends on your comparison level, right? So if you expect a traditional, or traditional heterosexual relationship, if your comparison level is a traditional heterosexual relationship, and you are looking for a husband who is going to go out and work and support the family, and you are going to stay home, and your expectation is that you are going to take care of the house and the children, right? If you find a husband who has that same comparison level, then you're going to have a satisfying relationship, right? Both people are going to be getting what they want out of the relationship. The rewards that they're going to be getting are going to be outweighed by the costs. But if your comparison level is different, if you have the expectation that your husband needs to be involved in housework, doing the dishes, folding laundry, that kind of stuff, but your husband doesn't have that comparison level, then you're going to have friction in that relationship, right? So people weigh these costs against rewards, but that weight is based on this comparison level. It's based on your pre-existing set of expectations about what you think you should get out of this relationship relative to what you should put in. So how happy you are with a relationship depends a lot on how much you're getting out of the relationship relative to your expectations and what you're putting in, right? So in other words, we can say satisfaction is benefits minus costs minus comparison level. If the net costs and benefits are higher than the comparison level, then you're going to be satisfied, right? If you are getting more out of the relationship than you are putting, not more in terms of like, I get $5 and you get $1, but if you're just getting more from the relationship than you have to put up with, or that it costs you, than sort of the downsides, then you're going to be satisfied. But if your net is lower than your comparison level, then you're going to be dissatisfied. If you have to put in more to the relationship than you're getting out of it relative to what you expect, then you're going to be dissatisfied. Some people disagree about this, though. Some people may say, some researchers will argue that it's really just not about benefits. People don't think about costs and benefits the way economists do. That, closest relationships are communal, not exchange. Exchange relationships, are all about this sort of cost-benefit analysis. Well, I'll do the dishes tonight, but that means that you have to do the dishes tomorrow night. Right? That's sort of an exchange relationship. And typically we have exchange relationships with strangers and acquaintances, right? My contractor is coming over to my house to do some work on my bathroom, and he is expecting that I'm going to pay him to do that work, right? That's an exchange relationship. In communal relationship, people will respond to needs without necessarily thinking about the costs and the benefits, right? This is my kid is sick and I need to stay, someone needs to stay home, and I have a huge project today at work, so, my wife will volunteer to stay home or something like that. That's a more communal approach, right? So in these communal relationships, this cost versus benefits versus comparison level might not necessarily matter so much. Overall, the rewards to the relationship may matter the most. So we can talk about alternatives, as they affect commitment. So these are perceptions of available alternatives, so comparison level of alternatives. AKA considered being single again, right? So if you are in a relationship, one thing you're going to consider, one thing that's going to affect your level of commitment is your comparison for potential alternatives, right? If you leave this relationship, what are your chances going to be on being single? If you think that you could be single and you could, get into another relationship, you have better alternatives out there, that's going to decrease commitments, right? But if you think that you have no chances out there, that's going to increase commitments, right? It plays this huge role in decisions to terminate a relationship, right? You aren't going to, sort of if you think about the relationship you have with your job, for example, you aren't going to quit your job unless you've got a pretty good, idea that you're going to get another job once you've broken up. You're not going to dump your boyfriend or girlfriend. Unless there's something awful that they're doing, you're not going to dump them unless you feel like you've got a pretty good chance, or you've got some, people that you can call for dates, sort of waiting in the wings, right? And so here we say it's not just that the grass is greener on the other side, right? But that you can actually get to that other side that influences level of commitment. You can also think of investments as influencing commitment. So these are contributions to the relationship. You think of these as costs that cannot be taken back, right? If you've been in a relationship for a really long time, right, that's an investment. If you have kids with someone, that's an investment. And so sometimes people will stay in relationships if they feel like the investments that they've made in those relationships are so high or so much that it's just not worth it to sort of back out. It's not worth it to start over with someone else, right? But you have to be careful about these investments, right? Sometimes investments can lead us to continue relationships that are potentially destructive, right? So, you can think about, you have a kid with someone and you've been with them for a long time, and all of a sudden they start behaving abusively towards you, which is, a pretty big cost to a relationship. If you have, if you view your relationship in terms of investments, well, we've been together forever, and we have this kid together, we have a couple kids together, that might actually decrease your willingness to terminate what turns out to be a kind of harmful relationship. So a lot of times most people have a desire for long-term relationships. I recall, when I met my wife, I had just gone through sort of a string of short-term relationships, and I was ready for ready to settle down. I was ready to, not be dating anymore. And one trick to long-term relationships is keeping them, right? Is to sort of manage those inevitable bumps in the road. So I have here from the chapter and from some research 3 tips on how to maintain long-term relationships. One way is positive illusions. So if you think back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, we said that people are the most satisfied in the relationships when they have unrealistically positive view of their partner. So if you can, think of your partner in positive ways, if you can focus on the positive things your partner does and sort of minimize the negative things, the things that bother you, annoy you, right, this will improve your relationship. Also think about attribution theory, right? You want to, make situational attributions for the good things or for the negative things that your partner does, right? When your partner does something bad that annoys you, it's not about them, it's about the situation that made them behave that way. Versus when they do things that are good, that are positive, that you like in a relationship, you want to focus on those as being dispositional, right? When your partner, remembers your anniversary and gets you something really nice, that's something about them, right? They are the kind of person who remembers anniversaries, right? So you want to make dispositional attributions for positive things and situational attributions for negative things. Also, good communication, right? Everyone always says communication is key. Um, but really, direct communication is one of the keys to positive relationships. There's a ton of evidence that suggests that couples who have good communication tend to have a better chance of making it long term. And good communication oftentimes means direct communication. It means saying exactly how you feel. It means, telling your partner about the things that bother you, telling your partner about the things that they're doing well, the things that you like in the relationship. So we'll go through and I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. Right? So optimism, unrealistic optimism is generally healthier than having a realistic or exaggeratedly unrealistic view. We want to exaggerate the positive things in our relationship. Generally, longitudinal study, they followed couples over time, and what they found was that couples who had positive illusions, who idealized their partners, positive attributes and minimized their partner's negative attributes, had stronger relationships over time. And interestingly, positive illusions at earlier time points predicted later relationship satisfaction, but it didn't work the other way around, which suggested that there's sort of a causal role of these illusions. We talk about these relationship enhancing attributions. So negative behaviors are caused by the situation, right? He was just rude because he's having a bad day, or he's tired, or that's just something that really bothers him. I have to be aware of that. And positive behaviors are caused by dispositional, right? They're inherent. Also, we want to sort of think about avoiding making, distress maintaining attributions. Positive behaviors are situational. Oh, he's just trying to make up for that bad thing that he did last week. Or, oh, he's just doing this because I know he wants something out of me next time. Right? These are distress maintaining attributions. And negative behaviors, seeing negative behaviors is dispositional. Again, distress maintaining. He always leaves the toilet seat up, right? Couples who make distress maintaining attributions early in their relationship tend to report less satisfaction later, right? And good communication has to do with having open and direct communication. It's not about having differences or arguments that causes problems. It's about how they resolve those problems. It's how they're handled when they arrive. It's striving for compromise. So making compromises, if I want to go out tonight and you're going to stay home and watch the kids, then I get to go out another night. Or, using when you blank, I feel blank language. Instead of being accusatory of other people, using this kind of language that, just says like, when you do this, it makes me feel bad. Or when you do this, I become upset. So you can talk about the behavior and not the person. It's not that I don't like you, I don't like this thing that you do, and let's work on coming up with a compromise to change this. And of course, saying what you mean, being very clear in your language. Right? It's really important to have a fight. I always say it's before you get married, make sure that you've navigated a few really good blowout fights. Right? The true test of relationship success is how people work together to communicate through difficulties and resolve those difficulties in a way that both people feel okay about it. You want to avoid, negative affect reciprocity, right? So this is sort of ramping up confrontation between you and your relationship partner, right? Exchanging negative feelings, right? So always focusing on the negative, ignoring the good or the positive gestures. You can think of this as sort of tit for tat. Your partner does something you don't like, so you do something to them that they don't like, right? Being able, a lot of times we want to sort of respond this way. to people. Well, you're going to do that. Well, then fine, I'm going to do this, right? But if you can preempt that desire to reciprocate with, negative affect with negative affects, your partner's really upset at you, and you're upset back at them, right? If you can sort of preempt that, that can lead to healthier relationships. So this is the last slide of the relationships lecture, but also of the class. There's some general principles you can kind of take away from the class. The first is that common sense isn't necessarily always applied universally. It's not always common. Sometimes common sense is useful, but sometimes it's not. Really try to, in your life, pay attention to the situational effects on your behavior, but also pay attention to the situational effects on others' behaviors as well, right? You will, find yourself getting less upset about things if you can see how the situation is causing people to behave, and it's not necessarily about them and who they are. No single demographic characteristic is going to sum up an individual, so be aware of stereotypes. Be aware of the judgments that you're making and how they're influenced by stereotypes. And avoid this sort of temptation to pigeonhole people. Another big issue is recognize that you don't necessarily know why people do or think the things that they do, right? We're really good at coming up with justifications and explanations for people's behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are right. And so you have to be aware of that there's always an alternative, that we might be wrong. And, be aware that it's profoundly healthy to think positively. Like the power of positive thought is very powerful. People who are unrealistically optimistic tend to be happier. People who are unrealistically optimistic tend to be healthier. So, looking at the positive is useful as well. All right, so that's it for this lecture and this class. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.